Either Anthony Albanese or Peter Dutton will be the Prime Minister after the next election. That is the reality, whether you support either or think they're both the same. Luckily, we have preferential voting, so you can vote for any other candidate or party, and if they win a seat, that's great. Parliament will be more representative, and we can see that happening over time with major parties getting less first preference votes. But if your chosen candidate or party doesn't win, your vote isn't wasted. Instead, your preferences will end up deciding which of these two become Prime Minister. More on preferential voting later in the video. So here's my thoughts on the major parties. It's a common argument that both Labour and the Liberals are the same. And for certain issues, that seems to be the case. If you look at housing, both parties want prices to keep increasing. On immigration, they're pretty much the same. And neither has done much on gambling reform. They work together on the latest political donation changes, and don't expect any major fossil fuel tax changes. Even so, I think it still makes a difference which party is in government. Labour is not perfect, and I've got plenty of videos criticising them on things like the National Anti-Corruption Commission or their misinformation bill. But the Liberals are on another level of dishonesty, incompetence and corruption. And for a lot of issues, there is a clear distinction between the two parties. From 2013, we had almost a decade of coalition governments. Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison. I mean, think of Scott Morrison's government. What did that group of ministers actually achieve? It was like a reality TV show with never-ending scandals. You wouldn't want the same bunch of people running the country again, right?
Let's make sure that we can get this great country that we love back on track.
What he really means is get Australia back to what it was like under Scott Morrison. And that's because he's chosen mostly the same bunch of people as his ministers if he wins the next election. At each election, a number of politicians get elected to either the House of Representatives or the Senate. After the last election in 2022, the Liberals and Nationals had almost 100 people in Parliament. The leader of the party then looks at those 100 people and handpicks a few of them to be ministers who have specific responsibilities. Like the Minister of Defence, who is in charge of the Department of Defence, or the Treasurer, who is in charge of the country's finances. All these ministers are part of what's called the Cabinet. To simplify things a little, the rest of the politicians that didn't get chosen just sit back and vote as they're told. They are the backbenchers. So who is in Peter Dutton's proposed cabinet? Well, obviously you've got Peter Dutton himself. At this point, he's basically a career politician, being first elected in 2001. Since then, he's been a minister under a bunch of Liberal governments, including under Abbott, Turnbull, and of course Morrison. For him to be saying let's get Australia back on track, he doesn't mean let's try something new. He means back to what it used to be under the Liberals. Peter Dutton is no stranger to scandals. Like his conduct as immigration minister with foreign au pairs, you can see more in my video here. Or when he was the only Liberal frontbencher to boycott Kevin Rudd's apology to the stolen generation. As health minister, he was rated by doctors as the worst to hold that position in living memory. There's too much to cover here, but another thing that showed his true character was his failed defamation lawsuit. Now, Dutton likes to talk about
freedom of speech
and loves accusing others of not being able to take criticism.
This guy, with his glass jaw, takes the cake. Watch him in question time. He has a glass jaw and he demonstrates it every day.
But a few years ago, after some random unemployed guy mentioned him on Twitter, he was apparently so offended that despite being the defence minister, he sued for defamation, and the matter spent years in court until finally it was ruled that there had been no defamation. Talk about a true warrior for freedom. Okay, so who else is in Dutton's all-star cabinet? The deputy leader is Susan Lee. She joined Parliament at exactly the same time as Peter Dutton. Isn't that nice? Since then, she's shown herself to be the perfect match for the Liberal National Party. One time she charged taxpayers thousands of dollars to go to the Gold Coast to inspect and buy an investment property. Another time she charged taxpayers for flights for her and her partner to to attend New Year's Eve events. Under Scott Morrison, she was the Environment Minister, and one of her jobs was to publicly release the State of the Environment report, a report which comes out every few years and summarises how badly we're destroying our environment. She got the report in 2021, and she refused to release it before the 2022 federal election because of the bad publicity. Here's a video I did on that at the time. How about Michaelia Cash, Peter Dutton's pick for Attorney General, the highest law officer of the land? Michaelia Cash was the Attorney General for Scott Morrison, and that should be all I need to say. She's had a ton of scandals herself, mainly around industrial relations, but two examples of her conduct as previous Attorney General sticks out to me. First, she appointed a bunch of cronies to be members of the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, who are kind of like judges who review administrative law decisions. Anyway, some of her picks were her own ex-staffers, or people with no law degrees. I did a whole series on the ridiculous political appointments the Liberal Party made that effectively destroyed the tribunal. Then, she helped block the introduction of a federal anti-corruption body. Here she is blaming delays on the extensive consultation that they were doing.
A nationwide consultation process on the legislation to establish the Commission has recently been completed. There were approximately 333 written submissions received. The government will carefully consider the feedback received through this extensive consultation process to inform further refinement of the draft legislation before it is introduced into the Parliament.
Then, when they got expert feedback, all saying their proposal was rubbish, her response was to completely ignore the extensive consultation.
And why have you gone about consulting for months and months after the original proposal was, I suppose, widely criticised, only to say you're not changing it at all?
We took on board all of the relevant feedback, but we have determined the model that we have put in place is a fair model. It is a balanced model, and as the Prime Minister said, it will deal with instances of the most serious criminal corruption at a federal level. That is what this bill is all about.
So, Minister, not one issue raised in the consultation process was taken into account by the government before tabling its legislation?
The government considered the feedback and determined that the model that it has is the appropriate model.
And that everyone who put in a submission saying it was terrible was wrong, and you were right?
Yep. The government considered the feedback and determined that the model that it has is the appropriate model.
All this was pretty shameful. Michaelia Cash had other priorities when she was Attorney General last time. Here she is announcing proposed legislation that would make defamation lawsuits easier against their critics.
To have the attorney here as well for what is a very important announcement.
And that is why we will be introducing legislation, the social media anti-trolling legislation.
Okay, so what about Dutton's pick for Treasurer? Surely the person who he wants in charge of our country's finances isn't a dud. But no, he's chosen probably the most incompetent person I've ever seen in Parliament, Angus Taylor. Now Angus is no stranger on my channel.
Where did the Minister get the forged document?
The Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I absolutely reject the premise of the question and the bizarre assertions being peddled by those opposite.
That's him trying to brush off the fact that he used forged documents to smear a political opponent, and then, in my opinion, misled Parliament about it. It's a fascinating story, and you can check out more in this video. Or there's that time, right before the last election, that Angus Taylor, then the Energy Minister, changed the law to delay the release of information that electricity prices were going to massively increase. The delay hid this information until days after voting in the election was over. Fantastic. Great move. Well done, Angus. Dutton's hand-picked team just continues with familiar faces, the likes of Barnaby Joyce.
Now, I like going to the movies, and I can't but always remember Howard Hughes, the Aviator. But Howard Hughes, the Aviator, but the Labor Party got Albo the Advocator. The great advocator, the great ideas man, straight from the pool room.
Then there's Dan Tehan, a guy that seems to have an IQ of 25, and worries a lot about flags being damaged by the wind. Then there's Bridget McKenzie, famous for her pork barrelling in the sports rort scandal, and failing to declare conflicts of interest. And the list keeps on going. My point is, this is who Dutton wants leading the country. But let's put people aside. What about Dutton's policies? I'm not talking about his fake culture war distractions that he loves to fall back on. I'm talking proper policies. Maybe he's got great ideas that will propel our nation forward. Or maybe he doesn't, because there doesn't seem to be much clear policy at all. I mean, he had this obsession with getting rid of flexible work arrangements for some reason, and then after a while he backpedaled. Then he said he didn't know if climate change was making natural disasters worse, and then he backpedaled. And after Labour's voice referendum, Dutton said that he will run a number of referendums on various topics, and then he's backpedaled on some of those too. One policy that hasn't changed is his promise to halve the fuel excise temporarily.
If Australians vote for the Liberal and National Party candidates at the next election, they'll get a 25-cent reduction in the price of petrol and diesel.
I mean, he's really pushing this one, at the expense of billions of dollars. And it's basically what Scott Morrison did before the last election. Unfortunately for Dutton, petrol prices are dropping, so the timing didn't quite work out there. Then there's his focus on housing, and somehow Peter Dutton is trying to convince us that the Liberal Party is looking out for the first home buyers, despite history showing the clear opposite, and experts saying that his plans will just add more fuel to the fire. But let's not forget Dutton's signature policy, nuclear power for Australia. Dutton wants to somehow develop a nuclear power industry from scratch, even though established industries overseas are shutting down their projects or are massively over budget and delayed. He wants to lock us into who knows how much spending. The estimates vary from $500 billion to more than $4 trillion, and there's barely any details and basically no plan. Even the Liberals in the various states don't want this. And you know something is off when even Sky News isn't buying it.
Well, how much does it cost and how are you going to pay for it? Because the government says you're going to have to cut services to pay for it.
We know that our plan is $263 billion cheaper than Labor's all renewables approach, which means 44% cheaper. So
is it 600 billion? Is it 120 billion? How many billion is it?
Well, it's $263 billion cheaper than Labor's. It's 44% cheaper, Andrew. And the nuclear
I'll move on
plan,
in a second, but you don't seem to be able to tell me. See, this is probably the problem, isn't it? You can't tell me here and our viewers how much it's actually going to cost to build these nuclear power plants.
This is the party that locked us into the AUKUS submarine deal that will cost over $250 billion. These are all numbers we can't even imagine, and the Liberals are intent on locking in more intergenerational spending. The party that completely and utterly bungled social security with robo-debt, with incompetence and corruption at every level, thinks it can roll out a nuclear power industry. We also know that the coalition's nuclear plans are all disputed by the actual experts. And we know this is all just a delay tactic to appease the fossil fuel lobby for a few more decades, at our expense. So all in all, a great bunch of policies there from Peter Dutton. Let's contrast that to Labor's last few years in government, because there's a fair amount they've been able to do, and a lot of it is boring and hardly ever covered in detail by the media, but there are some important things in there. I mentioned earlier in the video that the Liberals had stacked the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, or the AAT, with Liberal Party cronies, making the tribunal a joke. Well, Labor abolished the AAT and replaced it with a new, more transparent tribunal. Australia finally got a federal integrity body, the National Anti-Corruption Commission, or NAC. It didn't end up with the best model, and I've been pretty critical of that, but it was much better than the rubbish the coalition was pretending they wanted to bring in. Robo-debt was finally properly exposed, something else I've covered in numerous videos. To be honest, I don't know how the Liberals are still a major party after those revelations. Labor has replaced a ton of consultants with public servants. Consultants are more expensive, and there's been so many examples of failings by consulting firms. Let's just stick with PwC. During the last time the Liberals were in power, PwC was helping them with their global tax avoidance laws. But when those laws were passed, PwC then started helping its global customers get around those exact laws and avoid Australian tax. Or there's PwC's involvement in robo-debt, where they charged ridiculous fees to review the scheme and ended up providing some PowerPoint slides, and no one could apparently remember anything.
It may have been, but I cannot recall that.
Is that your honest response?
Beg your pardon?
Is that your honest response?
Yes.
That you have no recollection?
I have no recollection. But I don't recall actually where it came from, if it did.
You can see more on PwC's involvement in robo-debt in this video. This move to reduce consultants in favour of public servants is something Dutton is wanting to reverse. Speaking of multinational tax avoidance, Labor actually did pass legislation that made a lot of progress on this, with something called country-by-country reporting. It's no surprise that the coalition wanted this watered down. And remember how Scott Morrison's government handled our relationship with our biggest trading partner? In 2020, China hit Australia with tariffs on everything from wine and barley to lobsters and beef. A bunch of our industries got hit hard as a result. Labor has managed to get practically all those tariffs removed. Labor has supported substantial wage increases for aged care workers and early childhood workers, and they finally made wage theft a federal crime, something the Liberals could have done in 2021, but instead they dumped their own proposal for wage theft penalties in Parliament. Labor have increased funding for bulk billing. They've established free Medicare urgent care clinics all over the country. They changed the Liberals' stage 3 tax cuts, so everyone gets a tax cut, not just those who are better off. Still a rubbish policy, but better than the Liberals. They've provided some HECS relief. Again, not much, but better than nothing. They've made medicines cheaper and introduced 60-day prescriptions, something the Liberals keep crying about. But what about the economy? Well, inflation, which started skyrocketing under Scott Morrison, has come down and stabilised. Interest rates, which started to increase under Scott Morrison, have now started to drop. When the Liberals were in government, they were saying they would hit $1 trillion in debt by 2024, but that didn't happen. Labor handed down 2 surplus budgets, something the Liberals talked about wanting to do for almost a decade, but never did.
Well, Angus Taylor's argument appears to be that anybody could deliver a surplus except for the Liberals in office. You know, they had 9 cracks at this and went none for 9. They promised a surplus in their first year and every year thereafter and didn't deliver a single one. Now, Angus Taylor is not a serious person. He's not making a serious contribution, and that's why nobody takes him seriously.
Now, to be clear, a lot of this is pretty simplistic analysis, and there's a lot of variables. But the view that the Liberals are the better economic managers is just untrue. And to me, what highlights this the most is when during COVID, the Liberals gave billions of dollars of corporate welfare to companies that tripled their profits. A complete robbery. And in terms of Labor's achievements, can I pick holes in most of them? Yep, absolutely. But it seems to be the case that it's better than whatever the Liberals ever did. And that becomes important when it comes to preferencing one over the other. Remember, it may well be true that some independents or minor parties had a better idea, or a better way of achieving certain things, but that doesn't change the reality, which is that it's going to be either one of these two in charge. And that brings us to preferential voting. It's a powerful way to make sure your vote counts, even if your top preferred candidate or party doesn't win. And you choose the preferences. Parties might give you a how to vote card, but that's just a suggestion of what your preferences might be. Your electorate will have a bunch of candidates running, from independents, minor parties, and the major parties. The AEC website will give you a list of who those candidates are. You can then see which of them best aligns with you. Remember, not all independents are the same, and there's plenty that are just as bad as the Liberals. I'll put a link to this website in the description, so you can check it out yourself. When you vote for the House of Reps, for example, you'll need to number all the boxes in order from most preferred to least preferred. And if your top candidate doesn't win, then your vote goes to the next person until there's a winner. But at the end of the day, you'll need to preference either Labor or Liberal in your list. If, in your electorate, a non-major party candidate wins and they're best aligned to you, then great, that's an ideal scenario. But if that doesn't happen, at least your vote will sway which of these two become Prime Minister, because it will be either of these two.